Kristen Stewart's house in Los Feliz, Los Angeles, has always been a charming piece of old-world architecture, a mix of vintage and modern designs. But despite its aesthetic appeal, there's an unsettling air that lingers inside the walls, a presence that Kristen herself has spoken about on several occasions. It began subtly at first, strange noises emanating from the basement, like the soft scraping of metal against concrete, or the faint sound of footsteps on wooden floors. At first, Kristen assumed it was just the old pipes or the house settling, but as time passed, the sounds grew more distinct and frequent, especially late at night when the house was quiet and still. One evening, after a particularly long day, Kristen went down to the basement to check for the source of the noises. As she descended the stairs, the air grew inexplicably colder, the kind of chill that makes the skin on your arms prickle. There was nothing there, no sign of a broken pipe or any logical explanation. But the unsettling feeling didn't fade. In fact, it intensified. Upstairs, the flickering shadows became harder to ignore. In the corridors, Kristen would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye, as though someone or something was walking past her, only for the shadows to vanish when she turned her head. It was as if the house was haunted by fleeting memories or lost souls, lingering just beyond reach. One evening, while sitting in the living room, Kristen swore she saw a figure standing in the hallway. A tall, dark silhouette that seemed to melt into the walls as soon as she blinked. She stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding, but when she cautiously stepped into the hallway to investigate, there was no one there. Only the whisper of the wind from an open window. The house, which had once felt like a peaceful sanctuary, had started to feel alive in a way that unsettled her. Despite these eerie experiences, Kristen continued to live in the house, her curiosity and intrigue outweighing her fear. And every now and then, when the air grew still, she would hear the familiar sounds from the basement, followed by the flickering of shadows, a reminder that there was something lingering within those walls, something she couldn't quite explain. After living with the unsettling presence for some time, Kristen Stewart made the difficult decision to sell the house in Los Feliz. She felt she had reached a point where the strange noises and flickering shadows were no longer something she could ignore, but rather a constant reminder that something was off. Though the house was beautiful, its mysterious aura was too much for her to bear any longer. Kristen sold the property to a young couple, eager to start fresh in a home with character. They were immediately drawn to the house's charm and old-world appeal, not thinking for a moment that it might harbor any hidden secrets. At first, their experience was much like Kristen's quiet evenings, peaceful mornings, and a sense of living in a home with a rich history. But, over time, the subtle oddities began to surface. It started with the sound of someone pacing in the hallways late at night, just as Kristen had heard. The couple, believing it to be the house settling, dismissed it. But soon, they began to notice the shadows, which would seem to flicker and dart across the walls, as if something unseen was moving just out of reach. The husband, a practical man, laughed it off at first, assuming it was just the play of light from street lamps outside. But the wife, more sensitive to the atmosphere, couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. One evening, as she was sitting alone in the living room, she noticed something in the corner of her vision, a tall, dark figure standing by the door. It didn't move, but she could feel its presence, a heavy, oppressive weight in the air. When she turned to look directly at it, the figure was gone. She quickly got up to check the house, but found nothing unusual. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered long after. Things only escalated when they began to hear noises from the basement, just as Kristen had described. Scraping sounds, like metal dragging across the floor, and the unsettling sound of slow footsteps, as if someone or something was moving just below their feet. They decided to investigate, but when they opened the basement door, they found nothing, only a damp, musty smell that seemed to grow stronger the longer they stood there. It wasn't long before they too became obsessed with the house's strange occurrences. They reached out to a local paranormal investigator, hoping for answers. The investigator, after conducting a series of tests and seances, concluded that the house was indeed haunted by a presence that seemed to feed on the energy of its occupants. The shadows, the flickering lights, and the noises from the basement were all signs of something trapped within the house, unable or unwilling to leave. As time went on, the couple decided they could no longer live with the constant unease. They put the house back on the market, selling it to a new owner who was determined to uncover the truth behind the house's mysteries. The next family moved in with high hopes, unaware of the house's haunted history. They were young, excited, and full of dreams. At first, everything seemed perfect. But soon, they too began to experience the inexplicable sounds from the basement and the strange flickering of shadows in the hallways. The house, it seemed, had a way of luring in new owners, only to leave them unsettled and uneasy, never quite able to put their finger on what was wrong. Each new occupant, though eager to uncover the truth, found themselves retreating from the house's oppressive energy. Some tried to confront the entity they believed lingered in the house, while others simply abandoned it, unable to shake the feeling of being haunted by something they couldn't understand. And so, the house in Los Feliz became a cycle of shifting owners, each leaving behind their own stories of the unsettling phenomena they experienced within its walls. As the years went by, the house gained a reputation as a place where the past refused to stay buried, and the mysteries of its haunted corridors only grew darker with time. No one who moved in could escape the presence that Kristen Stewart had first felt. The house seemed to draw people in, only to leave them questioning what was real and what was just a figment of their imagination. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The house in Los Feliz, with its mix of quiet elegance and an ominous, heavy atmosphere, continued its unsettling pattern of shifting owners, each of them drawn in by its beauty only to be swallowed by its strange, supernatural grip. The next tenants were a couple of writers, hoping to use the quiet, secluded nature of the house to focus on their work. They were intrigued by the house's history, having heard rumors of its past but not quite believing the stories. They moved in with a sense of excitement, each expecting to uncover new material for their writing. But instead, they uncovered the house's deep-rooted mysteries. It started with faint whispers in the middle of the night, just barely audible, like someone speaking from the shadows. At first, they believed it was the wind or the creaking of the house settling. But then the whispers began to grow clearer. One night, the wife, unable to sleep, ventured downstairs to the living room, only to find the entire room cold, as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees in a matter of seconds. The whispers, now unmistakable, seemed to surround her, and she froze, her breath coming out in shallow gasps. "Help me," the voice said, clear as day. Terrified, she ran upstairs to her husband, who was still asleep. When she told him what had happened, he brushed it off as a bad dream. But the next night, the whispers returned, this time so loud that they woke both of them. The voice was different this time, no longer pleading but more insistent, almost angry. As the days passed, the strange occurrences became harder to ignore. They began to hear scratching sounds coming from behind the walls, as though something was trying to escape. One evening, they found the attic door ajar, even though they were certain they had locked it. They went up to investigate, but the attic was empty, save for a dusty old trunk in the corner. When they opened it, they found it filled with old photographs and strange mementos, things that didn't seem to belong to the house, but perhaps to someone long gone. It was as if the trunk had been waiting for them. The items inside seemed to be a collection of lives lived in the house before there's old letters, a tarnished locket, and a collection of faded photographs of previous inhabitants. As they dug deeper into the contents, they found a diary belonging to a woman named Evelyn. The pages were filled with odd accounts, describing how Evelyn felt trapped within the house, unable to leave, as if the very walls were closing in on her. There were repeated mentions of shadows that moved on their own and voices that whispered in the night. But what truly caught their attention was the last entry, written in a trembling hand. "I can feel it now. It's watching me. The house is hungry. It wants more. I fear it has chosen me." This was not just a collection of ghost stories, it was a warning. The writers became obsessed with Evelyn's story, but as they delved deeper into the house's history, things took a darker turn. They began to experience vivid dreams, dreams that felt like memories, like they were living out the lives of the house's previous occupants. The wife dreamed of wandering the halls, hearing her own footsteps echoing through the empty corridors, only to turn a corner and find a shadowy figure waiting for her. The husband dreamed of being trapped in the basement, trying to escape, but the stairs would always seem to stretch further away. One evening, after weeks of sleepless nights and strange visions, the wife woke to find the house eerily quiet. The whispers had stopped, and the temperature had returned to normal. But as she wandered through the rooms, she noticed something strange. Every photograph of the house's past inhabitants was now gone, replaced by empty frames. It was as though the past was slowly being erased. Frightened, she turned to her husband, but he was nowhere to be found. She searched the house, calling out his name, but there was no answer. It was then that she heard the faint sound of footsteps coming from the basement, slow, deliberate, and unhurried. She ran down the stairs, her heart pounding, but when she reached the basement door, it was locked. The key was nowhere to be found. Desperation set in. She pounded on the door, shouting for her husband, but the footsteps continued, unrelenting, growing louder. It was as if something in the house was calling her, urging her to join it in the shadows. In the morning, when the police arrived, there was no sign of the husband. The house, however, felt different, emptier, as if a part of it had been erased, swallowed whole. The woman left the house soon after, unable to return. The house in Los Feliz, with its unyielding presence and eerie history, continued to draw new owners. Each one, too eager to explore its mysteries, found themselves lost within its walls, entangled in a web of shadows and whispers that refused to let go. What began as an alluring home for the living had become a prison for those unfortunate enough to call it their own. And as time went on, the house continued to stand, its dark secrets buried beneath layers of new stories, waiting for the next soul to unlock the door to its haunted past. The house in Los Feliz, now infamous for its eerie history and cursed allure, continued to claim new occupants, each unknowingly stepping into a labyrinth of supernatural events that no one could fully comprehend. But the house, it seemed, had a way of whispering its secrets to those brave or foolish enough to seek them. The next owners, a young family with 2 children, had heard the rumors but chose to ignore them. They were convinced the house was simply an old, quirky place with a bit of character. At first, everything was calm. No strange noises, no flickering shadows. But, as with all who had come before them, the house's true nature soon began to reveal itself. It started with the children. The youngest, a 6-year-old girl named Lily, began talking to an invisible friend. She would sit by the window, staring out into the garden, and speak in a voice that wasn't her own. At first, her parents thought it was just an imaginary playmate, a harmless phase. But then Lily began to describe things she couldn't possibly have known. She spoke of a woman in a long, tattered dress who would stand at the edge of the garden, waiting. A woman who whispered that Lily should come outside and play. The parents dismissed it at first, thinking it was just a child's imagination. But the stories Lily told grew darker. She would describe the woman's face, pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken and unblinking, as though she were trapped in the garden, unable to move. One night, the family was having dinner when Lily suddenly became very still, her eyes fixed on the far corner of the room. She began speaking softly, her voice barely a whisper, as though talking to someone standing just beyond reach. Her parents froze, their forks half raised, when Lily said, "She's here. She wants to come in." Terrified, the parents tried to reassure their daughter, but as they looked around the room, they too began to feel the strange unease that had plagued so many before them. It wasn't just Lily's behavior that was unsettling. It was the house itself. The air felt thick, heavy with an unseen presence. The temperature dropped suddenly, causing the mother to shiver, despite being wrapped in a warm sweater. The silence in the room grew oppressive. That night, as the family slept, the house seemed to come alive with strange noises. The creaking of floorboards, the soft thud of something dragging across the floor, echoed through the halls. The parents awoke to hear footsteps outside their bedroom door, slow, deliberate steps that seemed to come closer and closer. The door creaked open, but when they turned on the light, the hallway was empty. Just shadows, lingering in the corners like silent witnesses. Over the next few days, the parents noticed that Lily had become more withdrawn, her behavior erratic. She would sit for hours in the garden, staring at the empty space where the woman had once stood, as if waiting for her to return. And return she did. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, the mother noticed a dark figure standing at the edge of the garden, just beyond the window. The same gaunt woman, now closer, her face half hidden in the shadows, her eyes locked onto the mother's. The woman seemed to be waiting, almost as if expecting something. Desperate to understand what was happening in the house, the parents reached out to a local historian who had studied the house's strange past. He revealed that there was a dark history hidden beneath the house's charming exterior, one that dated back to its earliest days. The historian spoke of a woman named Evelyn, whose tragic tale had been forgotten by most, but not by the house. She had once lived in the house decades ago, a young woman with a deep love for the garden that surrounded it. But Evelyn had disappeared mysteriously, vanishing without a trace. The rumors suggested that she had been the victim of a tragic accident, but some whispered that her death had been far from accidental. No one knew for sure, but the legend said that Evelyn's spirit had never left the house. Instead, it remained trapped, bound to the garden, waiting for someone to uncover the truth of what had really happened to her. As the days went on, the family's fear grew. The house seemed to be alive with its own secrets, the walls whispering of the past. The father, skeptical but desperate for answers, began digging into the house's records. In the dusty old archives, he found the missing piece of the puzzle, a newspaper article detailing Evelyn's mysterious disappearance. The story was riddled with questions and inconsistencies, but one detail stood out. It was believed that Evelyn had been involved in something much darker, something that went beyond a simple tragedy. The more the family uncovered, the more they realized that Evelyn's spirit had never truly left the house. It had lingered, feeding on the energy of those who lived there, drawing them into its tragic past. It wasn't just her ghost that haunted the house. It was the very essence of the house itself, the memories of all who had lived and died within its walls, intertwined with Evelyn's restless soul. One evening, after the family had begun to feel like they couldn't escape the house's grip, Lily vanished. She wasn't in her bed. She wasn't in the garden. In a panic, the parents searched the house from top to bottom. They found no sign of her, until they heard a soft giggle coming from the basement. The father raced downstairs, only to find the door to the basement open. When he descended into the dark, cold space, the air felt thick, almost suffocating. And there, standing in the corner of the room, was Lily, her back to him, her body rigid and unmoving. The woman was with her, Evelyn. The father reached out to his daughter, but when he touched her shoulder, she turned slowly, her face now a hollow mask of fear. She whispered, "She won't let me leave. She won't let us leave." And then the house went silent. As the father reached for Lily, the walls seemed to pulse with a deep, low thrum, as if the house itself was breathing. The shadows closed in around them, and the whispers began again, louder, more insistent. Evelyn's voice echoed through the house, and it was then that the father understood. Evelyn wasn't just trapped in the house. She was the house. The walls, the floors, the very air itself had absorbed her presence, her sorrow, her anger, and now it wanted them too. In a final desperate attempt, the father grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her towards the stairs, but the house seemed to resist, as if it were trying to hold them in its grasp. The shadows thickened, and the whispers became a cacophony, urging them to stay, to listen, to surrender to the house's insatiable hunger. But as they reached the top of the stairs, the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them in the hallway. It was then that the father understood the chilling truth. The house had claimed them, just as it had claimed all those before. Evelyn's spirit had not been bound to the garden alone. She had become the house itself, and it would never let them leave. In the silence that followed, the family was never seen again. The house remained standing, its secrets locked behind the walls, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to unlock its door. And so the cycle continued. the house in Los Feliz forever hungry for those who dared to enter. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.